I'm especially delighted to be present at this national stakeholder dialogue on land reform in Nigeria. Over the course of the next few days, this gathering will be discussing approaches to reforming and improving land governance systems in Nigeria. But building a consensus around the necessity for land reform is the easy part. Exactly what these reforms should be and how best to proceed in implementing them has always been more complicated, yet more important. Everyone, governments, corporations, citizens, academics, tend to have their own strongly held opinions, which is of course not surprising, considering that land is and has always been an integral part of who we are and how we define ourselves. In many cases, land is not just land. It represents everything from ethnic and cultural capital and legitimacy to economic potential, which probably explains why families, neighbors, communities, and even nations resort so easily to war over land. History is replete with accounts of how land and the resources in it and on it have decided the fate of nations and kingdoms. Indeed, a good number of the security issues that confront us today as a nation, whether they be clashes between herdsmen and farmers, or boundary and border disputes, or the debates around resource control and fiscal federalism, are firmly rooted in land. For this reason, it is essential that we pay full attention to how we maintain, how we use and allocate and deploy land to ensure that we derive maximum value from it. And of course, that it serves as a catalyst, not for anguish and tension, but instead for lasting prosperity and abundance. In any event, there is one thing that we cannot afford to do, and that is to bury our heads in the sand and hope that somehow our land issues will, on their own, inevitably find resolution. We cannot equally afford to act unilaterally without regard to the wide range of views and opinions held by various stakeholders, as well as the experiences of various countries and peoples who have attempted land reform. Regardless of whatever our ideological position may be, whether we take the view that ownership of land should be centrally controlled or privately owned, the role of the state is indisputable. We can debate the scope of that role, but not the fundamental principle of the presence of the state as a primary guarantor and enforcer of the integrity of the land and property rights that are created from it. Consequently, to maximize its potential, land requires the consistent operation or implementation of considered policies and laws. And when at any point in the life of a nation or a people, the administration of land no longer meets their aspirations, it becomes incumbent upon the state to take the lead in initiating and overseeing some form of improvement or reform to the system, even if that reform is one that will ultimately end in less state control. The issues around land tenure, titling, management, and access in Nigeria, of course, we know date back to the colonial times, and a lot of that has been very well covered by Professor Ido. At the time, the colonial administration introduced various reforms, largely importing English land tenure and administration systems, and imposing sometimes entirely novel land policies and laws, operating side by side with our customary systems. The post-independence era saw the introduction of the Land Use Act in 1978, which act has been entrenched in all of our constitutions since then. Despite all of these efforts, however, only about 3% of Nigeria's land area of over 900,000 square kilometers is documented in land registries a century and a half after the colony of Lagos took the lead in introducing land registration in Nigeria. With so much unregistered land, it should not be a surprise, therefore, that the benefits of land titling and registration have continued to elude us. The Presidential Technical Committee on Land Reform, PTCLR, was set up by the federal government in 2009 to spearhead the government's intervention in land governance and reform. The committee has since been working on finding innovative approaches that would radically improve land administration in the country. In this regard, the committee made a presentation to the state governors and other members of the National Executive Council on September 22, 2016, highlighting the benefits of adopting a systematic land titling and registration system in the country. Since the absence of regulations to guide the implementation of the Land Use Act was also identified as one of the major shortcomings of the legislation, the committee prepared some regulations which were submitted to the NEC, the National Economic Council, for further consideration and approval. This led to the establishment of a subcommittee of the NEC consisting of 7 state governors, which further reviewed and revised the recommendations. I'm pleased to announce that NEC eventually endorsed a number of those regulations, including 1, the systematic land titling and registration, 2, the regulations on registries, 3, the regulations on mortgages, and 4, the regulation on sectional titles. I understand that the committee has since refined these regulations in line with NEC directives and have submitted them to the Cabinet Secretariat for the consideration and approval of the National Council of State. And I believe that the National Council of State will very expeditiously endorse all of these regulations. That clap was not for the Land Commission, that's me. Thank you. Thank you. Given its mandate, I believe that the committee really ought to be commended for their resilience and their hard work so far. There is, however, much more to do if we are to fully unlock the potential of land in Nigeria. This is why this national dialogue is both timely and necessary, and why I would like to urge every one of us stakeholders to take very seriously the task before us, and especially identifying and addressing all of the problems that have hindered land administration and management in this country so far. Over the last 3 years, the administration of President Muhammadu Buhari has worked consistently to revamp the Nigerian economy and set it on the path of sustainable growth and true prosperity. Our Economic Recovery and Growth Plan sets out the vision in very clear terms, as well as the path that we intend to take to achieve that vision. Central to that plan is the diversification of the Nigerian economy, by which we specifically mean the diversification of our revenue resources, manufacturing, and our export base. In line with this, we are prioritizing agriculture, solid minerals, investments in transport and power infrastructure, and creating an enabling environment for business and investment, all of which are impacted by security of and access to land and the land management and reform systems that we're trying to put in place. All of this, of course, we know are bound to be the major issues that we must confront in order to attain our own economic objectives. Take the example of ease of doing business, the Ease of Doing Business Index, on which Nigeria climbed an unprecedented 24 places in 2017. One of the key issues that the World Bank assesses is the ease and cost of registration of property, of which land is, of course, a major component, and also the ease of dispute resolution. In fact, one of the subcomponents of the overall index is a quality of land administration index. Now, these critical issues explain our own strong commitment to ensuring that not just the federal government, but that all state governments and other stakeholders cooperate with the committee to ensure the adoption and implementation of the systematic land titling registration in all of the 36 states and the Federal Capital Territory. The land reform conversation in Nigeria is far from being unique to Nigeria. There is so much that we can learn from the experiences of other African countries, such as Rwanda, Kenya, South Africa, in this regard. And I'm glad to see that the African Land Reform Advisory Group has sent a very powerful delegation to this meeting. And I, of course, also understand that we have quite a few local and international experts here who will be sharing their experiences. This comparative knowledge, as well as the very varied experiences of our own local land administrators, will be very helpful in devising the most effective solutions to some of our challenges. As I conclude, I think it was the German-born economist, Schumacher, who said, and I quote, "Among material resources, the greatest unquestionably is the land. Study how a society uses its land and you can come to a pretty reliable conclusion as to what its future will be," end of quote. Both Professors Mabunje and Peter O. Adeniyi have referred to Hernando de Soto's seminal conclusion that we cannot resolve rural poverty without titling dead assets to enable them produce capital. De Soto's description of untitled land as dead assets is both intuitive and practical. To create wealth, land must be fungible, almost like money. It must become a medium of exchange, especially in its role as collateral. This is the only sure pathway to sustainable economic empowerment for all, especially the rural poor, where so much of our land is and so much of it is untitled. Our economic policy as a government is strongly influenced by the notion that given the size of the bottom of the pyramid in our country, and by that I mean the very poor, we must focus policy especially credit and land ownership on that segment of the populace. Our policies on land ownership, our credit policies must focus on that bottom of the pyramid. This is the path of economic and ultimately social reformation of our country. Indeed, the committee's motto is absolutely right: reform land and transform Nigeria. So may I enjoin all stakeholders present here today to work towards using land reform as a tool for the creation of a better and more prosperous future for our country. Let this dialogue mark a milestone on the road to that future. And on this note, it is now my very special pleasure and privilege to declare the National Stakeholder Dialogue on Land Reform in Nigeria open. Thank you.